this is Harriet Grayson, and I am the host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. And my objective is to highlight and to bring to your attention all the wonderful treasures that are here in our cities along the coast and in southern Rhode Island. And I'm very pleased today to have as my guest Dale Plummer, who is the city historian for the city of Norwich, which is one of the great treasures of Connecticut. And I, as a former urban planner, just adore walking through there. And I had the great pleasure, Dale, of meeting Dale last week because he took me on a tour of downtown Norwich, which was a great thing to do. So tell us, Dale, a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in Norwich history, and then, of course, we're really very interested to learn all about beautiful, historic Norwich.
Well, I've been interested in historic preservation for a long time, and of course, as you say, Norwich is a place that has a fantastic treasure of architectural styles and so forth. When I moved into the area, I lived in New London, I worked at Mystic Seaport, I became active in historic preservation in New London around the Bank Street, which they were planning to tear a significant portion down and so forth. Star Street. So I became interested, I helped to found New London Landmarks and became interested in what was going on in other towns. In 1980, I happened to be in downtown Norwich, and they were tearing down some wonderful 19th century buildings in the downtown for the new courthouse. And so I got very interested in Norwich, and 5 years later, actually just a year later, I did an historic and architectural survey of the downtown, which was the basis for the National Register nomination, and in which we discovered a lot of things we simply didn't realize that really surprised us. I mean, for instance, you know, the oldest building in the downtown is 1737, a sea captain's house. The next oldest is 1741, and that was a building used as a distillery to make rum out of molasses from the West Indies.
Right.
You know, and then you have an incredible assortment of buildings right up into the 20th century that really give you an object lesson in American history and the history of architecture and architectural styles, and in the kind of diverse, multicultural community that Norwich evolved into, in large part because it was, you know, an important seaport up until, you know, relatively recently.
Fairly recently, right. And in fact, we were talking because Dale did give this incredible, wonderful tour during a beautiful lunchtime in a glorious sunny day. And one of the things we talked about, which was not a surprise to me per se, but for a lot of people, and that is the significant role Connecticut played in slavery and how a number of people in Connecticut, well, sure, they were abolitionists, but before they were abolitionists, a whole bunch of people made an awful lot of money off of the slave trade. So you actually have done a lot of stuff on this, the slave homes, where they actually kept them and tried to save them, and all about some of the people who actually made their money from the slave trade. You want to tell our audience a little bit about that?
Boy, it's okay. Good thing we have an hour. Well, it's a very, very rich history, and part of it is that Norwich, like New London, was connected with the West Indies trade. So we sent ships down to the West Indies with local products, and in return, we brought back the products of slave labor. Rum, sugar, molasses, and, you know, other West Indian goods, but, you know, sugar, molasses, rum were certainly very important. And of course, that whole economy was fueled by the presence of enslaved Africans brought over across the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
So there certainly were some local folks involved in that direct trade, but there was also a trade with southeastern Connecticut where, in fact, enslaved people would be brought to the area. So you had developed in Norwich at a fairly early date a sizable African American population who started out as enslaved and over time were, freed through a variety of means, some of them by their own efforts, some of them by escaping or self-purchase.
Right.
And eventually Connecticut passed a gradual abolition act, or Emancipation Act in 1784. But we didn't completely abolish slavery in Connecticut until 1848.
Right.
Some people referred to us as the Georgia of the North. And the other thing is that people were, in the colonial period, of course, the local economy was really tied into the use of slave-produced goods, sugar, molasses, so forth. In the 19th century, the same thing, as the Industrial Revolution matured and took root, the cotton industry, the great cotton mills were all supplied with, again, cotton produced by slave labor.
Right.
And vast fortunes were made. And of course, so when the radical folks that we call abolitionists started making noises about slavery being a moral evil and so forth, most people were not too concerned because their livelihood depended to a large extent on this economy driven by slavery. So, I think after the Civil War, everyone suddenly became an abolitionist. Oh, yes, we were always against it. We never liked that, But the truth of the matter is they were, thought of as dangerous radicals who were threatening the status quo, the economy, my job, my ability to support my family. Kind of like, I think, in some ways, in the 1970s and 80s when you had the peace movement, the Americans sneaking into electric boat and taking hammers to, nuclear submarines. They didn't do much to them, but pouring blood down a missile tube, things like that. Since most of the people in the area derive their livelihood directly or indirectly from, the defense industry, pacifism was not well regarded in the area. So there's some real
and there was some homes that I know that you actually pointed out to us on our Friday tour about where the homes for this Underground Railroad where people actually hid slaves.
We have a number of, we don't know very much about the Underground Railroad in terms of the actual sites, but we do have a house on School Street in Norwich, which was owned by a fugitive slave, James L. Smith. So in a way, that is a very directly related site to the Underground Railroad.
Oh, okay.
And Smith probably helped others. The thing is that the Underground Railroad primarily worked, most of the people who worked on it and who helped people escape were in fact black themselves.
Okay. I think a lot of people don't know that, but that's important to know.
Right. It wasn't white people helping black people escape from slavery. And for one thing, if you're a fugitive from slavery and you're going to flee, going to these areas in the north, you don't know people, who are you going to trust?
Right, who would you trust for your safety, of course.
Right.
So that makes a lot more sense.
Some white person may be tempted to turn you in and collect a substantial reward. But there was one house that we saw on Church Street that was owned by an enslaved blacksmith who had been, freed by his wife. She had worked for the slave owner for 2 years, given him money, and basically bought her husband's freedom that way. And here's the house. Right there. Amazing.
Yes.
And the African Sunday School was, across the street. It's later, but 1815. It's a very rich history, which we're hoping to, flesh out and find out more about. And the more we find, the more interesting it is. And another major figure is David Ruggles. Ruggles grew up on Bean Hill in Norwich. He was, some people referred to him as the soul of the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
He was in New York. He was the secretary of the New York Vigilance Committee, which was the Underground Railroad in New York.
All right. And he was white or black?
Black.
Black.
Came from Norwich. He helped, among others, James L. Smith, who ends up in Norwich, escape, but also a guy named Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, who we know as Frederick Douglass.
Oh, fascinating. Very much so, yes, yes.
And he estimated that in a 7-year period, he saved about 600 people from slavery.
Wow.
And he was working very hard on stopping the kidnappings, because free blacks were being kidnapped in the North and shipped south into slavery. It was a hugely profitable thing.
Right.
I think
it's like the 7 Years a Slave, that new movie that came out earlier.
Very, very good,
yes.
And that's exactly what David Ruggles was trying to prevent. And in fact, I would highly recommend the movie. I think it gives a very good portrayal of the evil of that institution and how it worked.
Right, nothing like Gone with the Wind.
No.
This was much more realistic. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. And I think it really shows the kind of corrupting influence that this had on, everyone involved in it.
Right.
It ruined people's lives, both black and white. And certainly in terms of the slaveholders, the consequences for them were, also bad. Nothing like being a slave.
Exactly.
As Abraham Lincoln said, when white Southerners would say that slavery was such a positive thing and it was good for people and so forth, Lincoln said, well, then why don't I see anyone volunteering to become a slave?
Right, exactly. So then we get back to downtown Norwich.
Yes.
And you have provided us with some incredible photographs. So if you would like to describe them for our audience and tell us a little bit about them. So we have one coming up.
Okay.
And yes, there it is. Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this building and something about the timetable with it?
Well, I just mentioned Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
This is, in fact, the Morrigan Hotel. This was designed in the 1850s by a local architect to be the finest hotel between New York and Boston. See, Norwich was well situated in that you could take the steamboat from New York, land in the early morning in Norwich, take a train and go to Worcester and then to Boston and be in Boston before noon. But there were also a lot of business travelers that were using, excuse me.
Yes, modern technology follows us
yes,
everywhere.
Yes, it does, and I regret I didn't turn this off beforehand. But also Norwich as a prospering center of commerce, of industry, and so forth, attracted visitors in its own right. And they formed a corporation led by William Buckingham, who became later the mayor of Norwich, and then later during the Civil War was just prior to the war and during the war was the governor of Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
Buckingham led the effort to build this. And this is as it appeared after it had been vacant for about 10 years.
Okay.
As the city was preparing to demolish the building. And it was in deplorable condition. The city owned it.
Yes.
We almost lost it. And, we had a developer, Bruce Becker, who was interested in restoring the building. If we could stop, let's back that up. Yeah. Let's not go too quickly on this. Bruce Becker was interested in restoring the building, had requested going in and making repairs to prevent exactly this kind of collapse that you see in this photo. So we came within a hair's breadth of losing this magnificent building. yeah, the next photo. Okay. This is the lobby, 1999, 2000. You can see the floor had actually collapsed into the basement.
Wow.
I mean, really a remarkable example of neglect and the failure to do any remedial action to prevent, further collapse.
Right.
The city was actually determined to see this building demolished.
Demolished, get rid of it. Right.
Yep, and very unfortunate. This is the same scene today.
Right. As part of Dale's tour, I had the great fortune to go inside of this building and see for myself the unbelievable kind of restoration that has been done with absolute loving care to this building. And it's no longer a hotel per se, right? It is now kind of a residence.
Yes, it's 70 units. I live in one of them, in fact.
Right. And the nice thing about it is the use of what we call tax credits that enables the city and developers to come in here and investors to come in here and be involved in restoring these buildings. I had several years ago the great fortune of working for an organization that did a lot of what was take place in this hotel, where they would find investors who had really had so much money that they were looking for these credits, and they had no real great expectation of making a lot of money on it. Really, they were looking for tax credits, which is the name of the game. And they did a lot of restoring in another old industrial city, with some glamour to it at one time, which was Yonkers, which is on the Hudson River. Another glorious looking place, which needs still to this day a great deal of work. But the beginning of some of the restoration of the 19th century buildings was actually done because of these tax credits. So I do understand how these things work. I mean, investors need to have the place to put their money, so the developers aren't really spending their millions of dollars.
Right.
They're finding other people who, for economic reasons that their tax attorneys know all about, this is a good deal for them to do. So so this happened in Norwich. It certainly happened in Yonkers. It happened all over the country.
And the great thing about it is that everyone wins in this situation. The cities get buildings, restored and contributing again to the kind of economic life of the city. And having people living downtown is a tremendous advantage, because they're shopping in local shops, patronizing local restaurants and so forth. You're right there.
Right.
So it's a lot easier for me to go down the street and eat at the Harp and Dragon, for instance, or at the pizzeria, which is right underneath me, or the Mexican restaurant.
Right.
I don't have to get in my car.
You
I don't have to
go
drive.
Exactly.
It's
and some cities are fabulous at doing preservation. My children live in Pittsburgh, which is another city that doesn't believe in knocking down any buildings, but in fact spending a lot of time, and I assume there must be some tax credits along the way, for the restoration of some beautiful, again, a very big, important industrial city of the late 1800s, well, actually from the beginning of the 1800s, and some of those buildings were really in poor condition. And I just read in Sunday's New York Times about San Francisco, with all of the stuff that's going on in becoming a tech center. A lot of these tech companies have not moved to the suburbs, even if they have thousands of employees. But they bought up old warehouses in San Francisco and changed them into really with people with hundreds, sometimes thousands of workers. And again, same idea. I don't have to take the car out. I can take a train. I can take a trolley. Not today, they're on strike, but in San Francisco.
Right.
But in general, that's the idea. That is the urban planner's dream.
Exactly.
Is to make many things more dense. Doesn't have to be 100-story buildings like in Manhattan, but to bring density, because bringing density means that I can eliminate those polluting cars and bring in the trains and the buses, maybe natural gas buses, maybe electric buses, so that we can save the air and save human lives, actually.
Right.
So that's the urban planner's dream, is to have stuff like this. And the economics of late, in some places, this has turned out to be true.
Yes. And I think as things progress and as we move more towards a culture where we are very, concerned about our carbon footprint, about our impact on the environment, it makes a great deal of sense to reuse these buildings, to have people move back into town. You reduce this suburban sprawl that is so destructive of our open space and of our, our forests and so forth. And of course, also fosters tremendous pollution from, car exhaust.
Right, exactly. And we redo them. We try and bring in 21st century technology, so we make them green. We change the roofs. We do different stuff with the heating system. So yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we have some more photos. So why don't we take a look and see? Yes. So we saw this from the window, but why don't you describe what this actually is?
This is this is the restored ballroom of the Morrigan. This was put in the building in the early 20th century, I think 1906. But it's a wonderful space, capacity of 300 people. And I have to say, when it reopened in 2005, the first people to use it were a couple who were celebrating the 50th anniversary of their wedding, which actually the reception had been held here too.
That is an incredible classic story. That's absolutely
just
fantastic. That's a great story. Now this venue space is available for anybody who sees this or tells their friends and family about it, where they can go ahead and rent the ballroom for any event that holds up to 300. Obviously you can have all kinds of sitting, you can have dancing, you obviously can bring music in here, and it is a beautiful, beautiful structure.
Yes.
And you actually have restored all the lights that were they originally electric?
Yes. 1906, electricity was relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
So they lined the these cove ceilings with electric lights, I guess, to show off that it was a modern building.
Right.
But it had been, since it had been built in 1855, it had really been always progressive. Whenever new technology came in, they incorporated into the building.
Oh, okay.
So we have Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah. They've adapted. Yes, definitely, definitely. Do you have a green roof?
I believe, I don't.
That's the newest thing.
I think we might have missed out on that, although he does have the developer did put in a system that recaptures much of the air in the building and recirculates it. So it is a green building.
Okay, good.
His latest project in New Haven is a 500-unit new construction where the power is supplied by a fuel cell, and it is probably the greenest building in Connecticut.
Wow.
Really remarkable.
Yes, I mean, this is all part of our rethinking about what we should do with there's not unlimited fossil fuels, but we really don't need many more of them. We're already choking.
Right.
So, and if we in this country show the way, then it'll nudge along the Indians and the Chinese, and then they can't use the excuse, well, the Americans aren't doing it. Once we start to do it, we set a good role model for these who really don't want to do it. They're kind of forced into it, and that's okay. That's okay.
Say what you like. I think once America makes up its mind to do something, we do go into it whole hog. I mean, we spare no resources. So hopefully we will be leading the world in this. But Becker, the developer of the Morrigan, is certainly one of the developers who's been on the forefront of green energy and green buildings, and he has been, very successful doing that.
Right. I mean, you can still very much make a living doing the right kind of thing. Everybody can, just like you said in the beginning, it's a win-win for everybody.
That's
for the city, the developer, the investors, everybody wins, and certainly then the residents. Absolutely. So we do have some more pictures because Norwich is unbelievable. Oh, here we go.
Ah, yes.
Here is this considered a typical apartment?
Yes, well, the apartments vary quite a bit, but this is on the corner of the building. So each of the ones, the second, third, fourth, fifth, are very similar.
this I might say is Dale's apartment, his
Yes.
own apartment. And look at those windows. Those windows are the size of doors.
They are. They're enormous, and I get a fantastic view. We were talking earlier about the fireworks on the 4th of July, or around the 4th of July.
One of the,
I get a front seat view.
Right, so you can charge admission.
Yes, I don't have to fight the crowds. I can just stay in my apartment and look out the window and, see what's going on.
For anybody who doesn't go to Norwich, and there's a whole bunch of people who don't ordinarily, their July 4th ceremonies and the celebration and the fireworks are breathtaking. So
Yeah.
I strongly recommend it. You got to get your blanket down there on Brown's Park early on, and then just wait. And there's always vendors, people selling food, and you
Yes.
didn't bring your own. So it's a wonderful place to bring the kids. Leave the dogs home, but bring the kids.
The nice thing is there are also some good restaurants downtown. We have a Vietnamese restaurant.
Yes, I've been to it, yes.
Yep, which is quite good. An Asian Thai restaurant.
I've been to that one.
and La Stella's, which has Italian food, but very good. Harp and Dragon, which is a pub.
Yes, very nice beer, absolutely.
Yes, yes. But they also have sort of Irish style, food, and they're quite good.
And the family who owns that, is very active, as I understand it,
Yes.
in redevelopment in downtown Norwich.
Yes, they've bought 3 buildings, and they're working on buying a 4th one. They own ShopRite,
Yes.
the local ShopRite in Norwich and New London, and they have really been reinvesting their money in the community, which is a great thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one time I do know, years back, when the Indian gambling casinos were doing very well, the Mohegans had at one time put a bit of money into downtown Norwich, but they were going to have a ferry, and there were a number of things, at least if they weren't actually paid for, they were on the board, and then of course their financial empire collapsed. So,
right, the casinos are not doing as well now as they were for a number of reasons, including, of course, the economy, but and of course competing casinos elsewhere.
That's right. That's right.
When they were the only ones in the Northeast, it was
they were able to do spectacularly, and they were generous to the community.
Yes.
When they were actually rolling in the dough. Now not so much anymore. So they've cut back their interests. So anyway, so what else do we have here for? Oh, look at this.
Well, this is actually a scene from my family.
Oh, okay.
The gentleman third from the left is my great-grandfather, John Littlejohn, who was a native of Scotland.
Okay.
It turns out that the Boston store, owned by Reed and Hughes, Adam Reed was, in fact, from Scotland.
Okay.
Apparently my great-grandfather knew him, and somehow either was invited or inveigled a job in Norwich. So that's why I'm here. This is about 1890. It's a great photo. It
Yes.
just shows all the employees. And
what kind of company was it?
it was basically an early department store.
Oh, okay.
It was quite the place. It was one of several department stores downtown, but they prided themselves on their progressiveness. Progressiveness was the thing.
Yes.
You notice the light over the door?
Yes, I can see that. Yes,
That
definitely.
beautiful
Right in the
electric-
center, right?
Well, in 1885, the same year my great-grandfather arrived in Norwich, the city of Norwich decided to experiment with an electric light to see if it worked.
Okay.
And Reed and Hughes volunteered, apparently, to be the first to try out
Electric light.
an electric light in front of their establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Proved so successful that they introduced lights throughout the city.
Wow, okay. You should also tell us a little bit about Reed and Hughes, because they're actually, people perhaps may not know them, but they are wonderful names when it comes to buildings, not only in Norwich, but other places. You want to tell us a little bit about them?
Well, that was a chain, actually. They had a number of stores in various places throughout the Northeast. They also had one in Waterbury,
Okay.
which is still in existence, but as the Connecticut store.
Oh, okay.
Back in probably about 8, 9, 10 years after this photo was taken, Mr. Reed and Mr. Hughes had a parting of the ways, and so the Reed and Hughes in Waterbury became the Howland Hughes store.
Oh, okay.
Which continued as the big department store downtown for years.
Right.
And although it is no longer a full-fledged department store, the current owner has actually created a small store that sells Connecticut-made products.
Oh, very good, very good.
So whenever I'm in Waterbury visiting
Yes.
my brother,
Yes.
I like to stop in and buy like little Christmas presents or something that I can send to relatives.
Saying
at
here,
a
this is
distance.
where this comes from Connecticut. Very good.
Exactly.
Very good. So where were there other stores around? Were there any else around here?
I don't think there were any in the immediate area.
Okay. But the
there
store
were several,
itself then became a kind of a landmark in downtown Norwich?
Yes. It was called the Boston store, and I think the reason was that, Boston had that cachet of being a place where, people dressed well and were concerned about having nice things.
Sure.
So that if you were the
seat
Boston
of culture, yes,
exactly,
of course.
Exactly. So it may be Perth Amboy. I'm not sure. He moved down to Ansonia and then to Perth Amboy.
In New Jersey.
Right, and then eventually moved back to Waterbury, which is where I was born.
Oh, okay.
So.
And you did tell us we come from a very large family.
Yes.
Brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles scattered around everywhere.
Yes, yes, we have relatives all over. But yeah.
Is there still there is currently some controversy, if I understand it right, about that Reed and Hughes building?
Yes. Yes, and if we could perhaps look at the next photo.
Okay, very good.
This is the building as it was about 1901, actually.
Okay.
And what happened was in 1898 they modernized the building, and the left-hand portion of the building they put a wonderful metal storefront on, designed by C.H. Preston, a local architect that had received his training in Chicago. Of course, Chicago was the place,
of course,
for architects to train. It was the modern
city in America.
Exactly.
Yes.
But being thrifty Yankees, the owners decided that, gosh, why waste all this wonderful stuff from the 1869 building? So they moved the facade of the 1869 building over to the section to the right.
Oh, okay.
So even though that right-hand section is actually newer, it has an older facade.
Interesting, interesting. Well, that is Yankee ingenuity.
Yes, they didn't waste things.
Yes, and I see, the name is quite prominent in the photograph. So the controversy today now is on what to do with this beautiful old building? Yes,
the building was basically vacated in the late 1980s. And then in 1993 actually, October 1993, the city acquired it.
Okay.
And has held it ever since. They have not done very much maintenance or repairs, and this is as it looks today.
Right. Wow, what a difference. Yeah.
You can see the storefront has been replaced with probably in the 50s, with a granite storefront on the first floor.
Right.
The upper floors retain much of their original design, but you've got boarded in windows and it's disheveled, but it's basically there. The city, unfortunately, discovered after they purchased it that the very back part of the building had been built over someone else's land.
Oh, okay. So it's a title issue.
Right. So it took them probably 12, 13, 14 years to resolve that issue. They had to actually go to court, and they now own all the land. Yes, the building is under. But the or the building is over, right? They own the land the building sits on, and they have they put out a proposal for developers 2 years ago. They got one response from Bruce Becker.
Okay, and this is what the designs would look like for the future?
Well, the city rejected Bruce's offer. And so another RFP was put out, and this is actually designed by architect William Kroski of Hartford, who Norwich Heritage Trust, of which I'm the president, is partnered with Carter Realty, with Kroski, with the Motto Builders, and so forth, to come up with this proposal.
I got you.
It would put 17 units in the upper floors of the building, and the first floor would be returned to
storefront,
either a storefront or office use. You know, the cost would be about $6.8 million, and it would the city would put in $800,000, and then the rest of the money would come from private investors, from these, you know, looking to the federal and state tax credits, and also.
So this would basically be, it could either end or be historic preservation or affordable housing credits.
Yes.
That kind of stuff. Yes.
Exactly.
You know, people don't understand it, but that's what it's all about. People, you know, somebody doesn't come in and say, "Oh my God, I love this building. Let me go ahead and spend $20 million of my own money because I'm going to rebuild it." We know that that doesn't happen. What happens is that the government, through the feds, the state, whatever, makes available what we call tax credits. So people who've got a lot of money just take it as a credit, the same way you'd have the opposite. People who are very poor have a working kind of credit.
Exactly.
So it's a similar kind of thing, only instead of for poor people, which is what people protest about, this is for rich people.
Exactly.
And then they reinvest in these communities. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. And the city and the state and the feds do not have enough money to make all of these properties viable again.
Exactly. And of course, the other advantage of it is that because of the current economics of the downtown, a developer isn't going to want to come in and do these buildings over because he's going to make a lot of money from rental income.
Exactly.
But the ability to attract private investors, as you were just saying, is based on their need for tax credits. They're not so interested in making money. In fact, they're really not interested in making money from rents. It's the tax credits they're buying.
That's right.
And then, as long as it pays for itself,
yes, that's it.
They're fine.
That's right. And you have all those bodies coming in.
Exactly.
And then you have people who, again, just like what you're describing yourself, shop downtown. You entertain yourself downtown. And then one thing buys itself into another. So once you've got enough people there, then the guy who owns ShopRite, which is the same people with the big investment there, then they can have not necessarily a ShopRite, but some kind of grocery store.
Exactly.
I mean, they know how to do the business, they could bring it in. Then you have more restaurants, then you have other things kind of sprouting out, laundromats, cleaners, more restaurants. I mean, then you have the whole kind of thing that bubbles up. And usually it's people that don't have any children or have babies who then eventually they might move out. So it's that kind of community, but it is an artist community. That's what oftentimes they try to attract.
Exactly.
So people who are not afraid of anything, really, because there is always that, which is false.
Exactly.
The false fear that, oh my God, if I come down to downtown Norwich, they're going to kill me. Or they're going to beat me up, or my car will get stolen or broken into. And you know what? That could happen anywhere.
And the irony of it is that the downtown is probably the very safest place in the entire city.
Because you have all the police present.
There's a police presence. And actually, it's probably even better now because you've got 70 units in the Morrigan.
Right.
We probably have 100 people living in the Morrigan. We've got 60 or so in art space. We've got other apartments scattered throughout the downtown, Thayer Building and so forth. So, and with the Harp and Dragon being open late and other restaurants and so forth, you have an almost continuous presence of people downtown. So that, you know, chances are you're not going to be going downtown and it'll be completely deserted. There's always going to be some people around. The police come through, they're there, they have a presence. So the idea that it's unsafe is actually not true at all. In fact, my suspicion is because the Norwich Bulletin is located, headquartered in the downtown, anything happens downtown, it gets instant publicity. They've got their photographers right there and their reporters
out there.
So, you know, you actually have over-reporting and a tendency to kind of exaggerate
the bad stuff.
And there actually isn't really much bad stuff at all. And you know, in terms of violent crimes, things like that, it's non-existent. I mean, it's actually a very safe and peaceful place.
Right. Now, Norwich, as many of us who have actually traveled around know, it's a pretty large kind of place.
Yes.
So we're basically just talking about the downtown area.
Right.
And there are, you know, if you walk around, as I did with Dale, you know, there's quite a number of vacant buildings there, but it needs to rise, and it can rise to a certain point, and then it's kind of what we call in planning the kind of the tipping point in the positive, not the negative. In other words, you've reached a certain threshold where there's so many more people that they then bring in lots and lots of more people.
More people, people feel safer, and also they don't, you know, the people who first come in are the ones who are more willing to kind of take the risk.
Right.
You
the
know,
trailblazers.
Exactly, and then it becomes safer for the, you know, folks that don't like to take risks.
Right.
And eventually, you know, you have a real renaissance. And it's happened in other communities, and there's no reason why it can't happen.
Now the issue is with parking. Is there enough parking for the residents who actually like yourself? Because it's unlike New London, where there actually literally is some decent, not great, but decent transportation. There doesn't appear to be all that much transportation around Norwich if you didn't have a car. Is that true?
Well, we do have seat, and so the buses do operate. The intermodal transportation center, you know, has been built just outside the downtown on Hollyhock Island. It has 260 parking spaces.
Okay.
I think its real advantage will be once they reestablish a rail link, so that you could come park your car or walk down there and get the train. But that has not happened yet.
Right.
However, I would say in the Morrigan, what has interested me is that the parking garage that we have for the building is not entirely used. In fact, many of our residents, we have quite a variety of residents.
Right.
We have single people like myself. We have a number of young couples with babies.
Right.
Or young children. We have some young single, you know, adults who, many of whom don't have cars.
Okay.
They ride bicycles.
Oh, okay.
And that's one of the things that I think will eventually drive a grocery store into locating downtown, because they're frustrated because to get to a grocery store, they have to pedal out.
Right. I mean, that usually requires the car.
Right.
Exactly.
Because they can only take a very small amount back in
on a bicycle, for sure, or on two arms. Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And Bruce, the developer of the Morrigan, has actually been able to lease some parking spaces to adjacent property owners because he doesn't need them all.
Oh, okay.
Which is a wonderful thing. So I would say the parking situation is really not bad. We have a couple of parking garages downtown. We have some open parking lots that are publicly owned. And in fact, you know, if I didn't have to go to work off the bus line, I wouldn't need a car at all.
Right.
And I have been thinking, you know, gosh, if we had better public transportation,
right.
I could save thousands of dollars a year just by not having a car. When you think of the insurance, the maintenance, the gasoline, taxes, and so
the
forth.
Registration, right. All of that stuff adds up, definitely. And that, of course, is a dream for when we talk about urban planning, about bringing denser population. Is there one of the outcomes would then be no need for cars. I mean, bicycles, some people might think that's kind of extreme in the sense that our temperatures don't stay moderate in January and February, and this year not in March or April.
No.
But outside of that, sure, like you could see it more in California where the weather is nicer. But public transportation, definitely. And there is always discussion. The thing that helps could help New London down there is more shoreline transportation, upgrading and bringing that.
Yeah.
But of course, with all the nastiness that goes on with the New Haven Metro North Line, you can see this is a train system which has been neglected for decades and needs, a couple of $1 billion to upgrade. And of course, that is a heavily used source of transportation, because anybody, as I have, or you might have, driving 95, especially in the summer, is a huge nightmare, an absolute nightmare. We would clamor for the opportunity to get out of the car and get into a train, or even a bus that didn't stop at every corner.
Right.
So that is, and you don't think about that in a state like Connecticut, which is viewed as either having these kind of small cities like the Bridgeports, or just massive suburbs.
Right.
One suburb after another. And even poorer people live in the suburbs. They don't even live in the city. So, we have to get a kind of a different mindset. But I think that as things like Norwich, as we get more success and there's more publicity about the good stuff, that people will start to think about it, because we do have an issue here in the state because housing is very expensive.
Yes.
And it discourages people that even, graduate from UConn and one, finding a job, but two, part of being able to take a job is, will it pay for my rent?
Exactly.
And so if you had more things like that, there's that possibility. I mean, it's not an isolated thing, but it is really interesting to see what's happening. The other thing that I found was very interesting, which you didn't talk too much about on the tour, was Town Hall. For people who have gone up Broadway and may have seen it. Why don't you talk? I know we don't have a photo of it, but it's definitely something that people should take a look at. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about downtown and the beautiful Town Hall?
Well, the original Town Hall burned down in 1865, just before Lincoln's assassination. And it took the city 6 years to decide on where to build a new town hall and so forth. But it started in 1871, and they built this magnificent town hall, city hall. It opened in 1873, and it is designed by the same architect that designed the Morrigan Hotel, the United Congregational Church, and a number of other prominent buildings in the community, Evan Burdick. So it's a French Second Empire style with the mansard roof. Okay. It has a clock tower with a bell and just a beautiful, gilt spire. It's a marvelous cast iron porch. In the interior, much of the interior details and furnishings were actually made by local craftsmen. I mean, Norwich had a tradition of fine woodworking and cabinetry and so on, and you can see that in the building.
Wow. Okay.
It's a fabulous building. And I have to say, one of the encouraging things is that in the 1990s, actually I think this was in the 1980s, they were going to do some renovations in the city hall, and they started in the the ground floor.
Right.
A contractor comes in and starts taking out the paneling. It's wonderful, wainscoting around this one room. And he's very carefully prying it off the walls and putting it in his pickup truck, because he's obviously going to take it and sell it to someone else. And one of the city employees said, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" So we lost the paneling in that one room, but people actually said, and Norwich Heritage Trust, the preservation group, was very much involved in this. But the people of Norwich really said, "Gosh, this is a wonderful building. It's a treasure. We need to, restore it."
Right.
And they voted millions of dollars in bonding to restore the building. They hired a very well-known architect in preservation, Maximilian Farrow. He's kind of one of the jet set in terms of architects, but he's very good. And he did a great job of, restoring the city hall. And now they've just redone the front entry porch with a grant from the state and city money. So they're committed to the long-term preservation of the city. So while it's kind of deplorable that in some of the other buildings like the Morrigan and Morrigan Hughes, the city has not been a very good caretaker, at least City Hall has been well taken care of. It's really a landmark, and it does set a good example to the surrounding areas. And inside it, as an historian, I have to say we have a number of important artifacts. There was a portrait of Lincoln done about 1890 by a noted local painter, and Crocker. And back in the 90s, someone took a knife and cut it out of the frame.
Oh my God.
And it disappeared.
Oh.
We've never found it.
Oh.
So several years ago, the city offered a
reward,
a contract.
Oh.
I mean, a prize, a contest. People would paint copies of it.
Okay.
And the winner would have $8,000 and have the honor of having theirs put into the original frame.
Okay.
Which is a glorious gesso gilt, frame. So we have that now.
Okay.
There's also the Lincoln banner. It's an election banner from the year 1860.
Okay.
That was put up for auction. We don't know how it got there, but the citizens bought it for about $44,000.
Wow.
People of Norwich actually got together, raised the money, not only to acquire it, but also to restore it, which cost almost as much, because painted silk is a very difficult material to preserve.
Right.
And that's now in City Hall.
Right. So there's actually some displays so the public can go there
Exactly.
and take a look and see some of these beautiful artifacts. Well, that's nice to know.
And then we also have our Freedom Bell.
Oh, yes.
In a tower outside of City Hall, in a little courtyard, commemorating the Emancipation Proclamation and the fact that Norwich in 1863 was one of the communities in Connecticut that really went all out in support of at least the mayor, the council, and so forth, had a huge celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation. 100-gun cannon salute, pealing all the bells in the city for an hour, and we recreated that.
Yes, I know. Recently, right? Was it?
Yes.
Was it last year?
Yep, January of 1st, 2013. So, but what's nice is that we had that support, and that it sort of demonstrates the commitment people in Norwich had at the time, and hopefully
it's going to revisit itself again to restore the city, because it does take concerned citizens.
Exactly.
Because then politicians don't feel uncomfortable spending money or coming up with new and interesting ideas. And I think that we have, now I live in Rhode Island, but I lived for 18 years in Connecticut, and I can say this, not picking on Norwich per se, but
Okay.
there's a lot of this kind of politics that gets in the way of good sense. It happens on the
Yes.
national level in Washington constantly.
Yes.
So some of that kind of unhealthy, poisonous kinds of atmosphere colors what's really good for the citizens. And then it becomes up to the citizens to say, wait a minute,
Right.
this is in our good interest. You guys are crazy. You scream and yell at each other, but guess what? This is good for the city. The city
Exactly.
needs to revitalize itself. It doesn't come without a cost, but there are
Right.
things that have to be done. It doesn't have to be the city paying for all of it. The city has to make a contribution clearly.
Exactly.
And then they have to figure out, what they're going to do, where they're going to concentrate. And oftentimes it is a good idea, because of the way cities are constructed, that you start with the densest piece, try and populate that with more people, and then let it kind of spread itself out.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, that's how cities historically have grown, and they almost historically have always grown from water.
Right.
So, I mean, it isn't a mystery why Norwich grew up next to the rivers. I mean, guess what? Yes.
Right.
The Romans did the same thing. So, so that's a reality. And then I do know the state wants to spend some money in fixing up the ports, not necessarily Norwich, but,
Right.
New London.
New London. Right.
And it always had been this crazy idea of mine, which I still have, which is that we should have a ferry with someone like yourself on the paddle boat steamer,
Right.
like from the Mississippi, going from Norwich to New London, giving these wonderful tours about the great history of the colonial American Civil War, the Civil War in terms of not fighting, but in supporting it.
Oh, yes.
We could have these wonderful tours, and it would be a cute little boat. And the boat could have weddings and celebrations and 50th wedding anniversaries, so that it could make some money like that. So that's my dream thing, which I've actually discussed with the Norwich Community Development Corp. Nobody's offered me any money yet.
Oh, no.
But, that is certainly our waterways are historically, no matter what history you're talking about, certainly pivotal for the growth of the city.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there was a proposal to create a big steamboat in Norwich, years ago from one of the city councilors. But, I think a small size thing like the Sabino at Mystic Seaport, or the one over on the Connecticut River at Essex.
Right.
It doesn't have to be huge.
No, it doesn't have to be huge. It needs to hold enough people that you can make some money on,
Right.
not on the tours of the historic stuff, but on some events kind of stuff, and have a
Exactly.
kitchen in it that meets the Coast Guard fire safety. But beyond that, yeah, exactly.
And of course, historically, there were a number of these excursion steamers that went from Norwich, the Ella,
Sure.
I'm trying to think of some of the names, Gypsy. There were a whole bunch of them that would go. They had like a regular schedule. They would leave Norwich, they would go down to New London, then they would go to like Groton Long Point or Watch Hill or whatever. They'd drop people off, and then they'd pick them up on the way back, and people would have like the day down at one of these little resorts. It was quite a nice little thing.
So I want to thank Dale very much for coming. It's the kind of close of the show. I want everyone, this is your requirement. You watch the show, you tell all your friends, and then you take a trip to downtown Norwich. And you see the stuff, visit the restaurants, see the park, and if you really want some great celebrations for 4th of July, you've got to get yourself down there, look in the local papers, or actually I'm sure the city of Norwich might have something on their website telling you when to come, where to go, and perhaps where to park. It's a great opportunity to see a beautiful, classic old city. So again, I want to thank Dale for coming here and for doing the show. And I'm Harriet Grayson, and this is Community Culture Showcase.